All right. Well, let's jump back into the story then. And we want to thank everyone who's shared. We've got 18 shares. So 18 of you, we've got 173 people now joining us live. 18 of you have shared this on your walls. We're going to now get into the Joseph Bishop stuff in depth. So if any of you are willing to share this episode on your walls and just let people know, we're about to go into the story of what it's like to be active Mormons in the same ward as accused sexual predator Joseph Bishop, having your kids pass the sacrament to him, seeing him in the Sunday school presidency, seeing him not experience church discipline, all while you see people like Sam Young of the Protect LDS Children movement getting excommunicated. If any of you are willing to share this episode on your walls with friends, family, we'd love to have as many people listen to the story as possible. So please share if you can, and thanks to everyone who's shared it so far. All right, so Todd, let's just jump into the Joseph Bishop stuff now. So according to your story, you will have been questioning your faith for a couple of years, trying to communicate that with Sarah ineffectively, and your marriage is getting tougher and tougher. Let's talk about the day you learned about Joseph Bishop.
Okay.
And how you learned about it and what that was like, what you learned and what that was like. Sure. There are going to be people who have never heard of Joseph Bishop, so we want you to give background for those who haven't heard.
So Joseph Bishop is
we'll start with how you heard. Start with how you heard.
So I've on Facebook, I think it was Ryan McKnight shared the audio and or you and him did a impromptu podcast on it. So honestly, I knew who he was, but I wasn't registering the name because we were fairly new in the ward. But in the captions of that social media post, it was a man who lived in Chandler, Arizona, and so that kind of narrowed down for us. I'm like, that's interesting. That's in my town. And then nuggets of information that he was a mission president in Argentina and MTC president in Provo. And that kind of, again, narrowed it down that those things were registering in my mind. And then I don't know if we did it together or me individually at first, but I started listening to the audio of it. And as soon as I heard his voice, I told myself that is him. That's the guy in my ward. So I think Sarah, I'm a little fuzzy on this one, but I think did you find it as individually, or did I share it with you?
You texted me about it, and you just said, "Is this guy in our ward?" And the name didn't register to me, but as soon as I saw a picture of his face, I knew it was him. We had been in the ward for, at that time, 6 months, 7 months or so. Yeah. And
had you guys had any interactions with him as ward members? Did you know him on a personal level?
We didn't know him on a personal level, but I knew who he was. He was a member of the ward that you could tell was highly admired. Everyone knew him. There were always handshakes and hugs before sacrament meeting and handshakes and hugs after sacrament meeting. He would bear his testimony regularly. And I remember commenting to Todd a few times before any of this came out, when he would bear his testimony, it just kind of always rubbed me a little bit the wrong way. Like his testimonies were very kind of boastful. He would talk about people that he knew.
Kind of in a name dropping
higher ups. And do
you remember who he talked about knowing?
I remember him saying Harold B. Lee, Spencer W. Kimball, like he rubbed shoulders and work with them.
And, you know, a lot of times I would feel like when he would bear his testimony, it was like he was kind of giving his resume, you know, and just not what a testimony is supposed to be. And I never, you know, came away from him sharing his testimony having my testimony strengthened, you know. And I remember commenting to Todd a few times about that it just kind of, you know, was not the time or place. And, you know, so yeah, although we didn't have a personal relationship with him, definitely a well-known member of the ward and admired.
And you bring up something really, really crucial. You know, all of us are dumbfounded at how, you know, Sam Young could be excommunicated for talking about these issues, and Joseph Bishop could go unpunished for sexual assault and rape. And we know that over a couple decades, at least 3 different general authorities were informed about him, that the sexual assault took place while he was president of the MTC in Provo in the 80s. There was this room in the basement that he would take McKenna to and assault her. He's admitted all this apparently, but the church has known about it, and yet he was never excommunicated as far as we know, never disciplined, remains an active current member to this day. If all that is true, it has to be that his personal connections with top church leaders, and possibly there's always the possibility that he received his own second anointing as a MTC president, as a mission president. And if that's true, how do you simultaneously either be so close to someone as a top church leader that you would excommunicate them? You might have bias against ever punishing someone because you're close to them. Or if they've received the second anointing, which is supposed to be inspired of God, where you're given this special ordinance, usually by a first presidency member or an apostle, where your promise that your calling and election is made sure in the celestial kingdom. How does it reflect on you as an apostle or a first presidency member to have given that ordinance to someone when later on they turn out to be a sexual predator? How do you excommunicate them or remove them if you previously told them that their calling and election is made sure? Now, of course, we're speculating about all this because we don't know whether he, like Tom Phillips, like Hans Mattson, we don't know whether Joseph Bishop did receive a second anointing, but these, you know, both a close relationship with top church leaders and or having received the second anointing, which is likely, would possibly be some of the main reasons why the church has been hesitant to punish him. So again, I'm just speculating, but I think that's important.
Right. I mean, and just for clarity from our point of view, in terms of his membership status, we don't know. I've asked repeatedly, privately with our bishopric, and they do not comment.
We'll get to that in the story, for sure, right?
Yes.
So, so before the news came out, we feel like it's important to mention that, again, a lot of this is speculating, but definitely a part of the timeline that's worth mentioning. Also, his son and his son's family is also in our ward. And at the time, the son was serving as first counselor in the bishopric. And kind of out of the blue with, in our area, typically bishoprics serve for 2 years. Counselors serve for 2 years. Typically they're in for 2 years and then they'll release both. It doesn't always work that way, but a lot of times in this area, counselors will serve for a few years. They'll release them and call two new to serve with the same bishop. And it just was unusual that kind of out of the blue in January, he was released, but they didn't release the other counselor. It was just him. And he really had only been in for a short period of time in relation to how long they do serve typically.
Okay, so let's follow the chronology of the story. So you hear about this, Todd, and you reach out to Sarah, and you guys are like, "Oh my gosh, I just heard about this recording and this victim and this perpetrator. They're in my ward,"
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, Todd, what started happening? What wheels started turning in your mind? What was your reaction to this?
I was dumbfounded. I was just floored. I was speechless. I of all the wards in this world, in this, it has to be my ward, you know? I was just thinking, what are the odds, you know? And then thoughts of, okay, what interactions have I had or my family has had with this man? And so we asked our kids, and we confirmed that, like I mentioned earlier, that he has substituted for them. And so to make sure, I went to my phone, went to LDS Tools, and to check his calling, and he was in the Sunday school presidency. So as we all know, if a teacher doesn't show up on a Sunday, typically the member of the Sunday school presidency will fill in on the fly, and that happened at least once. And so
the reason why I mentioned the son being released was because that was something during that first couple of weeks when the news was out and we were, trying to.
Well, the son was released in January.
Yeah.
And
so that was
recording
something
came out in March.
Yeah. So that was in January, and that was something that I had mentioned to Todd, after these first couple of weeks, like reading news reports and listening to the recording and all of that. I was like, do you think that had something to do? Do you think that the church knew? Do you think that they knew that this was happening? And this was kind of a way for them to
carefully orchestrated event, maybe.
Yeah, and I mentioned that to him, during that first week or two, and I, we talked about it briefly, just like well, maybe, but there's no way of knowing that. And at that time, there was very little news about it, other than that the recording had come out. That was leaked, and there weren't really a whole lot of, things kind of started coming after that, right? Church made statements, the chronological order of how things happened kind of came after the weeks,
Okay.
after the recording was leaked. So,
but Todd, you were able to confirm in LDS Tools that this was the guy in your ward. You were able to confirm that he was still in the young men, in the Sunday school presidency at the time.
Right. I knew from conversations with I had with ward members, I knew he was the president of Weber State University in the 70s. I knew he was the MTC president in the mid 80s. And that's corroborated with the recording of what he expressed to McKenna of his professional career, Weber State, MTC. And all the dots lined up. So okay. I knew it was him.
And so you start feeling concerned, and you tell your wife, and you guys are both, and you both had sort of the spirit of discernment. The guy had always made you feel a little bit uncomfortable, right?
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I kind of have always, I don't know, maybe, you hear this a lot, women have an intuition, and I've always relied on that, and it really has never steered me wrong. And I had a feeling about him from the beginning. And yeah, it was something in my intuition telling me, something's not right.
Yeah. So what'd you do? What'd you guys do? Take us through the story of how you how you reacted and responded.
Well,
And
it's
what was
funny.
that first Sunday like where you go back to church and and you're saying his son was in your bishopric at the time?
No, he had been released January.
Okay, so right around that time,
12
right
months.
around the time that this comes out, right before, as if the church
That's
had known this was coming,
Yes.
they released the son
We're speculating, but yeah, that's
probably long before the you would have expected this counselor to be released.
Yeah. It seems to kind of, there's, you think there's something fishy about that. Now knowing,
Yeah.
there's no way to prove. But they also kind of, he was given a new calling, and it's a calling I've never heard of before. It almost seems like a calling that was just kind of created for him. I don't know. Again, speculation, but it's a calling in the stake that just, again, I've never heard of it before. And
So the son was released from the bishopric and given a special calling in the stake.
yeah.
And what was the calling?
I don't even know. It was more of a PR type.
Yeah,
calling.
like a church public relations type.
Okay.
Wasn't like a true ecclesiastical type thing.
Like where
This is the same son who later was accused of compiling this affidavit on behalf of the church and their lawyers
it's a
to try
separate.
and malign McKenna, right?
No, it's a
different son.
different.
Are there two sons in your ward?
Yeah. No, one
Well,
in our ward.
My understanding, that attorney man is, I don't know, I think he's in Utah, but he's definitely not in our ward. So a different son is in our
Different
ward.
son.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what was it like that first Sunday that you see Joseph Bishop in your ward after learning about him and what his background really was?
The funny story is, I don't know what day of the week that recording came out, but ironically, that weekend of that week, we were scheduled to go on a little anniversary trip. So, which would be like a Friday through Sunday situation. So we went to Waco, Texas, to the silos. She always wanted to go there, so I sprung that surprise. But during that week, we were listening individually to recordings, and
There were, during that week after the video or the recording was released, there were statements made by the church. There were, I don't remember exactly when the dossier was released. I don't know if it was that first week. I can't remember, but I was really, really like bothered by it. And the protective mother in me, and I've always considered myself an advocate for children. I've been a teacher for many, many, many years, and something just hit me to my core with this, and I just could not. I was laying awake at night, not able to sleep, thinking about it, and it just really consumed all of my thoughts that week. And then we had this anniversary trip, and so we, this was an effort because we had been kind of struggling with our relationship, and we were trying to kind of get back on track. And so we went on this anniversary trip, and we actually ended up spending the whole first day of our trip in the hotel because it was consuming everything in me. So, we were in the hotel, and I had found on my own a podcast that you did soon after the recording was released with Ryan McKnight. And that was the first time I had ever heard of you. I didn't know who you were. And I had listened to that and watched that podcast. And so I mentioned it to Todd, and to my surprise, he had already watched it too. And so basically, long story short,
I finally opened up.
Yeah, he was able to.
After all that time, if any time to do it, it was then, because she was, I think she had, her eyes have opened. She was in a position to see what was going on. We had a mutual person that we listened to, you, John, and I finally just opened up.
Yeah, the floodgates opened.
Okay, so Sarah, you watched the podcast not knowing that he had been listening to Mormon stories for a long time.
Yeah, I didn't have any idea. And so I was just looking for information about Joseph Bishop.
That's awesome.
And your podcast, popped up, and I ended up watching it probably the day before we left to go on our trip.
That's awesome.
So when we got there, I was like, I found this, and I was telling him some things that I had heard that you guys were talking about, and he was like, I could see, kind of while I'm telling him this, I can see his, his wheels turning in his brain, and then he's like, I'm going to tell you something, and he said, I've watched that too, and he told me who you were, and he told me, that what you do, and he said that he's watched and listened to many of your podcasts, and that it's really helped him. And anyway, he told me everything.
Okay. And so what was that like? So first of all, Sarah, what was that like to hear that your husband was in a full-blown faith crisis?
It was a shock. And, but honestly, most of what I was feeling on that day was just, I just felt so bad for him that he was going through that for so long by himself. And I just felt, I could be mad at him, but I wasn't mad at him. My heart just ached for what he was going through, and that he couldn't tell me, and that I wasn't in a place where I could be a safe place for him to tell me all of the things that he had been going through for the last 2 years. And so really that's mostly what I was, feeling at the time, was just, feeling just awful that he had to go through that by himself.
Well, kudos to you, Sarah, for having an open heart and loving your husband. Sometimes I think one of the saddest things I see is when people love the church more than their own spouse, or love their beliefs more than their spouse. And it sounds like you chose to love your spouse over your cherished Orthodox beliefs.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't know if this didn't happen with Joseph Bishop. I don't know if I don't know where we would be right now.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for that, because I feel like this last almost year that we've been going through this together, our marriage is stronger than it ever has been. And I've seen sides of Todd that I have never seen before in our 15, almost 16 years of marriage. And, I'm grateful, although it's been tough. I'm grateful for that happened that day, and that we could be able to grow together and not apart.
And that's what, that's why Margie and Natasha Helfer Parker and I started the Mormon Faith Crisis Project, or the Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis Project at mormonfaithcrisis.com, because we've been helping so many people in the faith crisis. We saw this pattern over time that while a faith crisis can destroy a marriage, it can wreck a family, it can lead to suicide. If it's handled in the right way, with the right people, with the right support, it can actually strengthen your marriage, make you a better parent, improve your mental health, and make you happier. And so that's why we named it The Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis. And I'm so happy to hear that was the result as well. So Todd, what was that like for you to be able to get that off your chest, that thing you'd been struggling with privately, and to have your wife show that she loved you and cared about you? What was that like for you?
It was transformative, I guess, probably the best word. This weight has been lifted. You know, I'm a stubborn guy that maybe by nature I internalize a lot. I don't share my feelings that well in general, and if anything that I needed to share had to have been this trial that I've been going through for all these years. And I should have done it earlier, but I'm grateful for the opportunity that presented itself. And to Sarah's point, it was a blessing in a sense, because I think she was in the position to hear what I'm saying and feel what I'm saying. Because I think oftentimes with members, if they're not in that place, your cries will fall on deaf ears, you know. So it was, to your question, it was a huge relief, and I'm so looking forward in moving forward. We can grow our relationship even more. Our family can grow, and you know, today is just one more step for us to move on and to grow, and hopefully just share our stories with others that they can benefit from, and for the church to please be better and be honest.
And we'll end with that sentiment, but yeah, it must have been a huge relief for you. And so many people, it's hard to know what the exact response is, but it is common for a spouse who really loves their spouse, who's believing, for the believing spouse to feel that sense of remorse and sadness and empathy. And I'm glad Sarah followed that route, and Todd, I'm glad you got that relief. Sometimes you find out your spouse doesn't believe, and you were scared to tell them you didn't believe. But then you find out they're actually on the same page. But sometimes it wrecks the marriage. So it's kind of like spinning the roulette wheel as to what the result is. But I'm glad it was so positive for you guys. All right, so let's talk about what you did over the subsequent months as you were watching all this unfold. How did you handle this in your ward, with your leaders, with your family? How did this proceed?
Well, after our trip, we, and I don't remember the date exactly, but Sarah and I met with our bishop of our ward. And
so this was, I think, 2 weeks after the recording had been released.
Okay,
so
you actually called a meeting with your bishop. How'd that go?
So the first Sunday after, we were not at church. The following Sunday was when we went to see the bishop.
Okay. How was that?
Interesting. I came with the position that Sarah and I, have the right to know. We are members of this ward, and we have the right to know the membership status of this man. I relayed to him, our bishop, that he has, at least on one occasion, substituted second hour, and we're concerned about the safety of our children and the children of our ward. And so we asked him, what do you know about these allegations? And he didn't know much of anything.
He really hadn't. I don't think, honestly, he had even listened to the recording. We mentioned the recording, and we said, this is damning,
Yeah, I used that word. I said, if you listen to it, it is damning as to what has happened.
And I think he was aware enough that he knew what we were talking about, but I don't think he had listened to the recording. And he hadn't spoken with the stake president about it at all. And this was 2 weeks later. So that was frustrating to us.
Yeah, so that is deeply troubling. If it's true, we know that the church has known about Joseph Bishop for decades. We know that several general authorities were involved. And we know that, like from Benji Schwimmer's interview, that if you just confess same-sex attraction in Mormonism, there's an asterisk in your name. Even if you've never had any, sexual interactions or romantic interactions with the gay person, as a gay person, even if you just say, hey, Bishop, I'm same-sex attracted, that can make you vulnerable to having an asterisk put by your name on your church records that prohibits you from working with youth or from other callings. We know from Benji Schwimmer and others that that's the church, the way the church thinks that it's protecting women and children and other people. And yet, Joseph Bishop, who's had multiple allegations of sexual assault and harassment, where we know general authorities knew about it for decades, no such asterisk that we're aware of was ever put on his record. And even the bishop was not warned by a stake president and or church leaders who clearly knew who was in this ward, because they're releasing his son as soon as this gets out, which is also problematic. They're responding to the press, not to protecting the members. They're keeping all this information, the stake president, the general authorities, they're keeping the information from the bishop and from the ward members such that people can't know who's in their ward and they can't protect their family members and ward members. That's outrageous that the bishop didn't know what was going on, that he's learning this through Mormon Stories podcast and through you guys, instead of the leaders being proactive and warning their ward members about a legitimate threat to their children, instead of a false threat of some random gay person that is reporting same-sex attraction, which has no scientific empirical connection to abuse of children of any kind. Isn't that kind of outrageous that your bishop didn't even know and wasn't warned by the general authorities and stake president?
Well, I agree. I mean, I've served as an executive secretary in previous wards, and my understanding the term is called an annotation on a member's record. If there's an annotation on the record, to your point, John, they are not to have callings with youth. And so there, obviously there wasn't an annotation on his record when our bishop issued the calling, technically before we got in the ward. So to your point, Salt Lake did not communicate to the local leaders about anything.
And McKenna, we want to thank McKenna Denson for joining us on this live broadcast. She writes that bishop had already spoken to McKenna and the stake president. So what McKenna seems to be suggesting is that your bishop maybe was playing dumb. And we'll ask McKenna. I just asked McKenna for clarification there, but McKenna is saying that the bishop had already spoken to her and the stake president before they had spoken with you. Is that something you were aware of?
No, we don't know.
Because we, like I said, we were out of town the first weekend. The next opportunity that we could meet with him was the following Sunday. And so really it had been about 2 weeks since the recording was released. Okay.
Well, McKenna just clarified. She is definitely saying that the bishop knew what had happened between her and Joseph Bishop prior to your meeting with him, that McKenna herself had spoken to him several times, and that according to McKenna, he pretended not to know when he spoke with you. That's what McKenna's saying.
It makes sense. I don't want to, say either way, but definitely
we just want to be careful from our point of view.
I'm just saying this is what McKenna is claiming.
Yeah.
So
and if that's true, that's even. So I mean, I guess that negates maybe he was warned, but then if that's true, he didn't do anything to protect the members that we're aware of, and he's deceiving ward members about it, which is also problematic.
Yeah. Also in that, that meeting with him, we were told that he was kind of in a holding pattern, kind of as, he didn't use those words, but he was waiting for direction from the stake president as of what to do and where to go at that point.
He said that our stake president is taking, I don't know how he phrased it, but he's taking care of this issue. He's in charge of this issue, that our bishop is not. It's being handled fully by our stake president. And
that he would hopefully, I remember him, something about the stake president was out of town, and that he would be in communication with him, you know, because we weren't satisfied with what we were hearing. And so we wanted a plan. We wanted some answers as to what was going to be different in our ward moving forward, and how we could be, you know, sure that our kids would be safe, and, you know, all of those things. And really, he, you know, there was no plan moving forward. We asked, is he even, are you going to release him? We asked if he was going to be released from his calling, and he wouldn't answer that. He said, you know, I don't know. And we said, if anything, if you can't do anything yet, at least release him from his calling. If not, you know, to just show the members of the ward that you have the members in mind, that you are keeping, you know, keeping the members in mind, and just as a sign to show us members, if you can't say anything, you can release him, you know. And he wouldn't, you know, he wouldn't, he didn't agree to that. He didn't, you know, he didn't say any, you know.
He just kept just basically say, our stake president is handling this, you know. He didn't want to give any yeah, he was just saying, our stake president's handling this, you know.
Yeah, it's clear that Colonel McConkie and the church PR machine and area authorities would have had to have been involved, and the stake president was taking their marching orders and telling the bishop to follow his direction, but not to act. You know.
Yeah.
Because if they release him and excommunicate him, certainly in a public way, it's almost as if they're admitting that there was a problem and that he was guilty, right? So they're caught in this catch-22 of wanting to handle it, but not wanting to open themselves up to legal or PR ramifications. And so they're going to want to handle this discreetly, right?
That's a possibility.
It's exactly, because, I mean, we left that meeting feeling very, just, you know, we were not satisfied, and just feeling frustrated because we didn't get any answers. And I remember driving home that day, I looked on LDS Tools on my phone on the way home, and his record was not showing up anymore on our LDS Tools ward directory. So that day, but the week prior, it was there. And
so either they excommunicated him, or they relocated his record in some way to where there'd be no evidence that he was still a member in good standing. Is that right?
Or they can.
That's an easy thing to do, to hide a member's record.
You can it's a click of a mouse to just shield information from ward members. You know?
And we know that's been done, because later on, months later, after McKenna came to our ward, and a member of the stake presidency was involved in removing her off the stand, I know that it's an easy thing to do, because that family's record was hidden, right? that day almost, or soon after. Their record was hidden off the ward directory.
Which family?
We're jumping ahead a little bit, but
The member of the stake presidency that helped escort McKenna off of the stand.
Okay, so you're saying that there are other instances of you seeing the church removing evidence of membership from LDS tools for whatever reason they want to.
Yeah, and that one, I mean, it was hidden for a short period of time, and now it's back.
Okay, all right. Okay, so so you notice that after your meeting with your bishop, where he's non-committal and pretends like he's uninformed and unaware, all of a sudden Joseph Bishop's membership record mysteriously disappears without any notification to the ward or stake members or any explanation.
Yeah.
correct.
Mhm.
All right, what happens next?
The bishop in that interview with us, not interview, but meeting with us, he invited me to meet with our state president. So I took it. I took the opportunity. So
Well, and he wanted to go right away, and all of this was really, I mean, I was conflicted because, all of this other stuff about the church that I didn't know about, I had just been told by my husband, right? And I was in that, that mode of like, what am I going to do with all this? And so I'm still in the middle of this, feeling, rocked to my core about what's going on with Joseph Bishop and what I'm seeing firsthand happening, right, in my ward, and statements that the church made that were really troubling because they were implying that McKenna was not telling the truth. And the dossier that was released about her telling very personal things about her life in an effort to make her look not credible. And these things I'm dealing with, and at the same time I'm going through this with, it's just kind of all a big jumble. And I forgot where I was going with that.
So the stake president called you guys in, or you were
that's what I
invited.
was saying is I was hesitant for Todd to go meet with the stake president because I just was like, let's just wait. We just need to I'm dealing with all of this, and it was just a lot. And so it took him, I think, about a month before he went. So it was probably a month later before he made an appointment and went to see the stake president.
Okay.
So I alone went to see our stake president, and it was basically the same conversation I had with our bishop, giving him the story of we're in the ward, we're troubled by this news. Our son, the story that I had with my son, him being the substitute one time. And I asked the question, stake president, what is the membership status of this man? And his comment was, sorry, Brother Gale, I can't comment. I can't comment. And I asked why. And I was polite. I just said, I feel, President, I have the right to know. I strongly believe, in the safety of my kids and the kids on my ward, and it's important that we as members of the ward know the status of this membership. And, I've listened to the recording, and it's very damning, and I need to know what his membership status is. And from my point of view, I thought that's a very appropriate question I can ask because I'm in the ward. It's not like I'm some random member in a different stake. I have the right to know because he is in my midst every Sunday and around children. So he wouldn't answer. He said, I remember the phrase he used was, the priesthood keys, don't worry, Brother Gale, the priesthood keys are at work, or something to that effect. It will work out.
Yeah, and that's kind of like, these are not the droids you're looking for, right? That's kind of, don't look at the man behind the curtain, everything's fine.
or just trust. It's trust in the brethren, trust in the priesthood that
it'll all work
out.
Everything's okay. It'll all work out.
Yeah.
And, in their efforts to try to help us feel better about the situation, in my opinion, all it did is just kind of make us, more frustrated and more just upset about the whole situation of how they were handling it.
So Todd, emotionally, did you freak out? Did you get angry? Did you feel intimidated? Did you just go quiet? Did he satisfy you? Like, how did you respond?
That's an interesting question. Ever since my evolution of things, I've always revered priesthood leadership, and I always kind of would be just a pinch, nervous or scared, or make sure I'm upright in my chair when I'm speaking to a priesthood leader. But especially when this issue came, I treat them with respect as a human being, but I perceive my bishop as just a human being, just a man, no mantle. And I perceive my stake president the same way, I didn't have any fear, I just wanted answers. I think generally priest leaders for the most part want to do good and try and do the best they can to do good. Not in this case, obviously, and with this issue, but that fear talking to this man became no longer, it just wasn't there. But I was still frustrated. I didn't get, in the back of my mind, I probably knew I wasn't going to get the answer that I was looking for, but I felt I needed to try. I felt like I'm not going to be idle anymore. I'm not going to be silent, so it left frustrated, but not surprised.
Okay. So what else tell us more? What else can you tell us about the story?
Really, so I think he went to see the stake president in May, like the end of May, right?
I think so.
Maybe it was even the beginning of May. I can't remember. But, in that time between when we met with our bishop and when he went to see the stake president, there was at least a month. It was business as usual at church. There was no mention that anything had happened. There was, nothing. And, in a way I can see that they wouldn't, but at the same time, for people who are concerned, for people who have worries about it, it's not helpful, and so there wasn't really anything. Again, it was just like nothing had ever happened. And so I felt like I should mention that. And then at the beginning of the summer, either the end of May or early June, they finally, after it had been months since we had met with the bishop and asked that he would at least, if the bishop couldn't do anything else, at least release him, over the pulpit, so that the members of the ward would know that they're taking care of it, that they're handling the situation. And it wasn't until the beginning of June, they finally released the Sunday school presidency. They released the president over the pulpit. We sustained, they released the first counselor, but they never released him. They never spoke his name. They never anything. So the presidency was released, but there was no mention of Joseph Bishop being released that day.
So again, that seems super weird to me. My memories of being Mormon is that when someone's released, it's announced. And in this case, it sounds like they released Joseph Bishop without ever announcing that he was being released.
Right. So they said the names of 2 of the 3 men in the presidency, the president, the first counselor, but didn't say anything about the second counselor at all in the release. So yes, it was very odd. Normally you release all three and verbally say their name, and you raise your hand and say, yes, thank you for your service, but his name was not mentioned at all.
And again, that has the smell of a cover-up.
Possibly.
Yeah, that's really weird. Okay. Well, at least, I mean, on the one hand, that's troubling. And on the other hand, I'm sure you were relieved.
Well, I mean, at that point, I guess relief is not, we were kind of already at the point where frustration and kind of a little bit of anger had kind of taken over. So
in full disclosure, and that's again our point of view, just to be factual as much as possible. After the recordings came out, it came to a point where Joseph Bishop only came to sacrament, and on a very few occasions came to Sunday school, and that's it. Never to third hour.
So he took a lower profile in the ward.
Yeah, and I actually think that the first few months after it was released, at least the first month, he wasn't seen. But then after that, he started kind of making a presence again. So I don't know exactly how long, but it seemed like maybe he just, was laying low and then waiting for kind of everything to kind of blow over. What it seemed like, and then he kind of started making his presence again. And now he's every Sunday, pretty much, in sacrament meeting.
So McKenna's asking, when was he secretly released?
I think it was around either the end of May. We couldn't remember exactly. We think it was at the beginning of the summer, because a lot of times bishops will release people. In Arizona, I don't know what it's like in Utah, but in Arizona, the summer, it's people leave and they're gone for weeks at a time. And so if bishops are going to release somebody, they usually will do it at the beginning of the summer, because then depending on the calling, they don't need to call anybody. They've got some time. Like, they don't need to call anybody right away, because usually it's a skeleton crew during the summertime.
Okay. So you're saying late spring, early summer, possibly, but you don't totally remember. So also, McKenna's asking if you've noticed whether or not he takes the sacrament. Why don't you talk about, as I understand it, one of your sons actually had the uncomfortable job of administering the sacrament to him. Is this an okay part to tell that part of the story, or do you want to wait and tell that at some other point?
No, that's fine. So, one thing that we feel is super important, and that we have felt from the very beginning, even though I, was going through this process, Todd had already been through it, and I was going through this process of being able to listen and understand and really see things for what they were in the church. But one thing that we agreed that we would do from the very beginning is that because we felt like we had been kept from the truth for so long, we were lied to about a lot of things about the church, we were not going to do that to our children. And so we began early on, maybe April or May, talking to them about the church. And you better believe that the Joseph Bishop situation was one of the first things that we talked about. And the main reason was because he's in our ward, and we felt like it was important for them to know who he was, and, that they, needed to be careful of him, and, and that kind of a thing. So, so they knew who he was, from early on.
Your kids knew.
They knew who he was. We have 2 boys that are the age of passing the sacrament, and I don't know why. Maybe because I was in such a fog of going through a faith crisis for those first few months. It never occurred to me to even, think whether Joseph Bishop was taking the sacrament or not. It never occurred to me. But later on, we thought, well, why don't we ask our kids? And so we asked our boys, and they were like, yeah, oh yeah, I pass in the sacrament every Sunday. And and then I was like, are you sure? You need to be sure. Are you sure? And they would describe him to a T, who he was. They knew who he was. And yeah, so if they weren't the ones to pass the sacrament to him, they saw, the other boys, do it.
And obviously we have seen it with our own eyes as well. So,
yeah.
So as far as you know, he's uninterruptedly continued, Joseph Bishop has uninterruptedly continued to take the sacrament from the time you became aware of this issue to the present.
As far as we know, yeah.
Especially recently, because we've always watched for it, but yeah, I mean.
So recently he has taken the sacrament.
Oh yeah, as regularly, like as last Sunday, I'm sure. So
that suggests that he's never been disciplined, as far as we know, for what he did to McKenna Denson.
Yeah,
He remains a member in good standing.
Well, yeah, I mean, some people that I have talked to about it will say, well, that doesn't mean anything. That he takes the sacrament doesn't mean anything, because they can't, if he wants to take the sacrament, no one's going to stop him, Well, that's true, but typically someone who has been disciplined, someone who's been, if you're disciplined and you're, you're seeing a bishop or, counseling with your bishop to be able to go back into good standing, one thing that you have to do is not take the sacrament, and the bishop pays attention to that, and that's part of your repentance process. So if he was being disciplined, he wouldn't be taking the sacrament. If he was excommunicated, I mean, why would you want to? I don't know.
And again, we don't know. It's all speculation, of course, but we don't know definitively if he's a member in good standing or not. We just know that he takes the sacrament. But everything else is speculation.
I mean, I guess
as far as membership status goes.
I guess it's a possibility, that he could have been excommunicated and he is still.
My understanding is if you're excommunicated, you can't take the sacrament. But.
I know, but what I'm saying is, when I've tried to make that argument to other people, they use that as like where they say, well, no one can stop him from taking the sacrament. If he's been excommunicated and he still wants to partake of the sacrament, he can. No one can keep him from that. So, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, even if in theory, a non-member can take the sacrament, but you would think there would be a very explicit, clear conversation with the bishop and the stake president where that was what he was supposed to do. I mean, if he's going to keep attending, that suggests that he's still a believer, right? And if he's going to keep attending, you would think that there would be a very explicit communication between the bishop or stake president and him about what he should and shouldn't do.
Yes.
I know that when I was excommunicated, I was told you can't wear your garments anymore, you can't pay tithing. They were very explicit about what I could and couldn't do. Why wouldn't it be the same thing with him?
Well, and if you're a bishop sitting up on the stand, who has been a part of an excommunication of someone or a discipline, of someone, and you see them partaking of the sacrament, wouldn't you then go after sacrament's over, have a discussion with them about it? I don't know. I have never once seen our bishop or bishopric members ever talk to him, or honestly ever acknowledge that he's there. So, you know, my mind thinks, are they supposed to, you know, kind of separate themselves from him? And have they had instructions not to, you know, speak with him or publicly, you know, where people can see? I don't know.
Yeah. And he's got to be a tar baby for the church, obviously, because you just don't want to touch it, you know?